Okay, so hi there. We're with
Hi.
Jan Griffiths, so welcome. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, so Jan's a team performance coach, and she's the president and founder of Gravitas Detroit. Can you, Jan, just frame what you actually do right now with your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Gravitas Detroit is a brand new company. It was formed late last year, and it is committed to creating the leaders for the future. We are focused on team performance coaching. We look at all aspects of diversity and inclusion and what it takes to really unleash the true leadership ability that's inside everyone. And that's what Gravitas Detroit is all about.
Wow, sounds great. And you're Jan Griffiths, and for anyone who's listening, I'm Peter Griffiths. Are we related? No, we're not. But prior to press and record, we were just having a chat. We both, I guess, have some Welsh heritage. I'm guessing Jan more than myself, because mine's more the namesake. As Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually were born and you used to live in Wales, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I lived in Wales for the first 23 years of my life.
And for people listening, I mean, you've got an amazing story. I guess what life had laid out for you in terms of tradition, you grew up on a farm, is that right?
That's right. I grew up on a farm in a small village of Coety, which is right outside of Bridgend in South Wales. And I was expected to grow up and marry the farmer next door and have a couple of kids and keep the farming line moving. And I didn't agree with that picture that life had set out for me. I wanted to do something different. I didn't know what it was. I had this drive and this passion to take on the world. But as a young woman in her early 20s, I didn't know what that looked like. Back in those days, in the early 80s, there was no exposure to different industries, opportunities to work in other industries. We didn't have the internet, really. We didn't have anything that we could research and understand what was out there. But I had this drive that said, I need to get out there. And I need to find a way to get out there. And I refuse to accept those limits that we often have in our minds that are set by our environment. So my environment told me, marry the farmer next door. But deep down inside, I said, no, I can't do that. So I had to push against that. And along comes the automotive industry. I had a call from what we would call a temp agency. And I remember I was riding my horse on a field, and my mother called me in to take the call, obviously before cell phones. So I took the call and they said, well, there's this company, it's called Borg Warner. I had never heard of it. And we want you to interview for a purchasing assistant. And I didn't really understand what automotive was, what purchasing was. I did not have any typing skills. I came out of college with a business studies degree, but I didn't know how to type, and they wanted somebody to type. So I ran up to the Welsh Valleys at the time. They were running all these courses to bring additional skill sets into the mining communities. And I did a crash course on typing, and I basically went into the plant and I said, yes, I can do this. I had no idea what I was doing. But what I did was I stayed behind every single day after work, and I did the typing at the end of the day so people couldn't see how slow I was actually on the typewriter to get the typing done.
Brilliant.
So that's how I started.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you ended up in Detroit, where you are now, right?
Yes, that's right.
Wow,
The
that's quite a
company
big
that I
difference
worked,
between Wales, right?
that's right. I worked for Borg Warner Automotive, which was an American company, still is a great American auto supplier. And we were connected at the time. We made marine and industrial transmissions. And since I was the purchasing assistant, I was typing these bill of materials for these transmissions all day long. So I became a walking bill of materials. I knew everything about these part numbers. And then I became more inquisitive. I would ask about the blueprints, about the specifications. What is a casting? What is a forging? What is a machining print? And I was just relentless, asking questions all the time. And I quickly was promoted into the position of buyer, which I remember looking at in the day, typing a telex for the buyers and thinking how wonderful that would be to be a buyer someday. And within 6 to 8 months, I was a buyer. And then they promoted me again to materials manager within less than a year with very, very little experience. Again, I'm in my early 20s at this point. And the opportunity came up to move a transmission line from the plant in Wales back to Muncie, Indiana. And really nobody wanted to get involved with this project because it was originally they had sourced it into Europe and now they were moving it back to Muncie. And somebody thought, well, hey, there's this feisty young girl in Wales that seems to be, that knows a lot about this product line. So why don't we peg her as the program manager to make this happen? I was so excited that I was selected for this job that I could barely even see straight. I didn't know anything about immigration. I didn't really understand where Muncie, Indiana was on the map. And I flew to Muncie, Indiana, and that was it. That was the launch of my career in America. And they liked my work in Muncie, Indiana. They thought I was a novelty because I didn't understand the language and they didn't understand my language. We speak English, but it's very, very different.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
You
think
can
Mira can
relate, right?
actually identify with that because when we first met, obviously I've got a northern accent. I grew up quite close to Wales, and I think for a while, Mira, correct me if I'm wrong, you couldn't really understand me, no?
Yeah, and but I've so resonate with your story, and I just go as you're talking. I go, yeah, I know that. I remember something similar. I remember when I first time went to Dubai, I did not speak English,
Oh,
and after a few years, and look at me now. I mean, still not perfect, but
close.
yeah, and we it's easy to forget, and I think lots of new people, lots of young people now, they think they should have it right now, but there is a journey behind it, and there is lots of what I can hear from your story. There is lots of joy in whatever you were doing in that moment. It's not, oh, I should be doing something else. You were
Right.
there, you were present, you were in the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've loved every step of my journey. I wouldn't change a thing. And when I came to Muncie, Indiana, I often tell, young women, it's so important to travel and really assimilate into other cultures and figure out how to do that because it's good for the mind and it's good for the soul to figure out how to connect with other human beings in a different setting. And when I started in Muncie, I had no idea. I was so green. I remember landing in Chicago and looking at the guy next to me and saying, oh, I didn't know Chicago was on the coast. I didn't really understand that it was on a lake and there were these big lakes. I didn't know any of that. And I land literally in a cornfield in Muncie, Indiana. I caught a connecting flight from Chicago to Muncie. I had never driven an automatic. And then I was sitting in the car on the other side of the car. I didn't really understand what that was about. And then I had to drive to the hotel. So I figured out, how to make all that happen. And then I remember sitting it was a Signature Inn in Muncie, Indiana. And I remember sitting in the morning and seeing all these people eating donuts. What is wrong with these people? Why are they eating donuts in the morning?
That's brilliant.
Then looking at the TV and the news, some sort of morning news program was on, and looking at the TV and thinking, now where am I on the map? And actually looking at people in the Signature Inn in the morning having breakfast going, excuse me, could you tell me where I am on this map? They must have thought, oh my gosh, how green is this woman?
It's amazing story. It's amazing story. Yeah.
Well, and now I've traveled all over the world, and now I find that, that story I find amusing. At the time, it was problematic. But I tell you what it has done, it has fueled me in so many different areas because it's fueled me to emphasize that message to other young women to get out there and get into other cultures And as a mother of now a 17-year-old, I have made absolutely sure that my daughter can travel internationally by herself, and she's had that ability for several years now. I do not want her to feel as uncomfortable and as green as I was traveling in my early 20s. She could get in a plane and go anywhere on this world right now, and I wouldn't even worry about it.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear, because I guess what happens when we travel, right? We touched on it before. It does expand your mind. Let's be honest. I mean, you keep hearing that, but you learn about other cultures, and once you immerse yourself and you land somewhere that you don't know about. I mean, all three of us, right? We've all now lived in other people's countries as well, and it's really humbled me because, like it or not, you have to learn the ropes, right? So you have to find your way, and it actually develops those skills that you already have as humans, right? But it just
Yes.
helps you hone them. And I guess, touching on leadership, these are the kind of things that are really useful, right?
Yes, you're right. And one of the most important skills that we know as leaders we have, whether it's being a leader of our own life or as a leader of other people, is this idea of connection. We have this deep rooted need as human beings to connect with others. And when you're talking to somebody else who's from a different country, who looks different, who maybe speaks a different language, who grew up with a different set of values in a different environment, you really have to work hard to figure out how to make those connection points. It's not just automatic. You can't just assume that it's one way or another. So I think that's the real value when you work with other cultures. It really goes deep into figuring out how to connect with others.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And this human connection is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the kind of thing that we forget as humans quite a lot. And this is why we started this podcast and why we have a business called Mind Takeaway, because a lot of the times humans just forget their humanity, right? And I think,
Yes.
again, pointing back to leadership, the more human you are and the more comfortable you are with your own journey, where you're at the moment, that's where it gives you real leverage and impact, right?
Yes. Yes, it does. And I've learned the hard way over the years.
Yeah, me too.
I've tried to fit the mold that other people set out for me. And even, even in the last 10 years, there's a certain mold required for example, for a VP of a global supply chain organization for an auto company. And yes, I've always been the one that's been a little bit more edgy and perhaps, pushed in areas that others have not. But still, even having said that, I would love to tell you, oh, I always speak my mind and I'm always authentic. But that's not true. I can't sit here and tell you that. I'm a human being, and when I'm in a room with somebody that I know controls my paycheck and my life, I am going to change the way that I think or say things in order to please that person. Now, I don't do it to the point that, of course, you agree with everything, but you have to. I'm a single mother, with a mortgage. And I think that a lot of leaders out there today forget the power that they have over other people's lives. It's this awesome responsibility that you have. And you have to treat that very, very carefully. You have to nurture that and nurture that relationship with the people on your team. And I think a lot of people forget that. So I've been there. I have tried to fit the mold. I've pushed against the mold. And finally, I reached that point where I said, okay, I love leadership. I love helping and seeing others develop and grow. That's my area of flow. That's where I'm in my happy spot. And how do I make that happen? And the way to make that happen was to leave my corporate track, my corporate role where everything was great, great boss, great company, and start Gravitas Detroit. And so here we are.
Yeah, and I really love your story because I guess from the outside, it looked like you had, you were at the top of your industry, top 100 women, a VP. You could say secure. I mean, okay, what is safety and security? But from the outside, it looks like you had a well-paid role. Why would you rock the boat? I'm really interested to know, what occurred there. I mean, there's no doubt that you're passionate about helping, future leaders, develop their skills. But what occurred to you at that, what was that moment when you were like, right, it's time to, change?
I've been asked that question quite a lot, as you can imagine. Yeah. I looked at retirement, and I looked at this retirement model that we seem to have in our society today, and particularly in automotive, but it's also in other industries. So you work until whatever, you pick the number, right? Whether it's 55, 60, 65, whatever. You pick a number. In your mind, you work with your financial planner, or you say, okay, I'm going to have this pot of money, right? And then I'm going to, I don't know, maybe I'm going to buy a cottage, I'm going to buy a condo in Florida, play golf for the rest of my life. And I could not relate to that model. Again, I can't relate to what was expected of me. So I was expected to stay on this treadmill of corporate life and then jump off at a predetermined point and then do something else. So I started to think about this something else, and I thought, well, I would really love to create this business and work with people to become better leaders and work with teams. That's what I absolutely love to do. And then I thought, well, why wait? Why am I waiting? Just because society dictates that there's this model that you're supposed to follow. I've never followed that model since the day I was born. So why am I starting now?
That's brilliant.
And I thought, well, why wait? Why not do it now? Well, then, you get the voices come in your head and they say things like, well, but you can't, and I also enjoy speaking. I do a lot of motivational speaking. And then the voices come in and they say, well, you can't make money, being a motivational speaker and doing all this team performance coaching. You're not going to match your corporate salary doing that. Correct. And so what? So I had to make a conscious decision to take my corporate salary to zero overnight, and to recognize that it would take some time to build this business. And I have not regretted that decision. I am loving my life. I've loved every minute of it. And I just have, like I've done all my life, I have this firm belief in myself and what I'm doing, and it will work. It just will.
Yeah, I really love what you said there, because it's just taking that step and knowing that you're going to go and do it, right? Because I guess what a lot of entrepreneurs do, and me too in the past, where I've had businesses that haven't really beared fruit, I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, what you just said there didn't seem to be any shadow of a doubt. You were like, I'm going to do it, and I've made that conscious decision. And I guess,
Yes.
Let's be honest, good leadership as well. It doesn't really matter what happens after that, right? Of course, you want it to be successful, but I guess we forget that we have a lot of resilience and a hell of a lot of resources. It's already pre-baked. We have that. So I'm guessing that we can deal and navigate with all of the ups and downs. And then that's what makes it fun anyway, right?
Yeah. And it's about, you put your mind in that place of success. And I'm committed to that. I have a vision of what my life will look like and looks like today. And I'm committed to making that happen. And once you have that, and you have that level of certainty, we know that leadership is about certainty. People need to feel safe around you, and they need to feel that you are certain that this is the right course of action. Now, along with that is this idea of vulnerability. And that's a lesson that I've really had to learn the hard way, because I grew up in a leadership model that said, you never, ever admit if you make a mistake. You always have to know everything. You're supposed to know more than the people that work on your team. You make the decisions, and if you don't, you're considered weak. And you had better sit at the head of the table. You march through the agenda. You are in charge, and don't let people show you, see your weakness, right? Because then they will not respect you. That's the model I grew up in. And as I grew up through that model, I thought, this doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, I can resonate with that as well. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake,
it feels uncomfortable, right? And it doesn't feel, again, talking about our humanity, it's not very close to being connected to other humans, right? Because actually it's the opposite.
Exactly. So really the model is all about fear. It's all about generating fear, right? And it never felt right to me. And as my career progressed, I moved away from that model, and I'm completely the other side of that model right now.
Can I
And
ask you, in your career, because I'm really interested, sorry I
yeah,
interrupted a little bit there.
yeah.
I'm just really excited to hear that you sound like you were a compassionate leader. You are a compassionate person. That's what gravitated us towards connecting with you, right? Has that
Yeah.
got you into trouble? Because I totally resonate with, I've always said what I wanted to say, but also I needed to pay the rent. So as a leader, I didn't really want to, go too far as to rock the boat, because you have to be diplomatic, and you learn that from, the hard way by, being too loud in meetings, and then you end up getting, slapped down a bit. But what was that moment after, some of this key learning through just doing and from your experience? What was that shift for you when you were like, right, compassion and emotional intelligence is the way forward, rather than ruling by micromanagement and, being authoritative and telling people that you're always right?
I don't know, there was one moment, I think it was gradual, but I'll give you an example of something that really felt wrong to me. This was several years ago, working for a company, I won't name it, and I was head of purchasing for Automotive, and we were going through some commodity increases in the supply base. And I knew that this particular commodity was going to go into a shortage situation. So developing the relationship and keeping that relationship with the supplier was critical, because you had to assure supply. We had to make sure that we knew the pricing was going up, but we had to minimize the price impact and delay it as much as possible. You knew it was coming, but that's the best that you could do at the time. And I worked for somebody who absolutely would not accept that, even though it was a global commodity situation, and insisted the way you treat suppliers, you're supposed to have them in the conference room, you're supposed to be yelling at them, beating them over the head with a baseball bat. And I've never employed that style ever. It's amazing that I've been in purchasing in automotive for so long, because that's absolutely not my style. So what I did was I would meet with the leader of sales for that supplier organization, and we would have our meetings off-site, because I knew that my boss at the time expected to see me and hear me beating this guy up in the conference room. And I knew that if I did that, I would lose him. And the impact to the business, we would have price increases, we'd have them probably immediately. We'd have trouble getting supply. I knew that that was not the right situation, the right way to handle it. So we would meet off site, and we would have these really long lunch meetings, and we would come together and we would talk about outcomes. Okay, what is it that the supplier organization wants to achieve? What do we want to achieve? How do we do that together, knowing that we both can't have everything? So, it was a very open, honest discussion about two people trying to focus on an outcome, not two people digging their heels in, saying one's right and one's wrong. And that, when I had to do that, I had to actually move physically off site to have that discussion. I knew something was very wrong.
Yeah, that sounds really cool that you had insights there to be creative, right, as a leader. And that shows true leadership, right? That instead of getting into a battle, where that's the thing in the Western way, especially, is just pummel them into submission. And then, if we win, great, you get a gold star off your boss, right? But what occurred to you is that connect with these people, find out, some kind of mutual way forward where it's a win-win. Because as you probably knew then, you had that insight that you want to have some sustainability as a focus. Because correct me if I'm wrong, if you pummel people in the mix, then what happens later on is when your back's against the wall, because let's be honest, these industries are a roller coaster, right? You can't just stay on top all the time. I'd hazard a guess that because you have this good connection, and that person's probably got trust in you as well, that when things go wrong or the wheels come off, they're probably more likely to be flexible, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we talk a lot about trust these days, and developing collaborative relationships, whether it's internally or externally. with a supply base. And then I find that often our behaviors don't match the talk. So we see the PowerPoint presentations, we see the speeches, and that this is what we're all about. But then you go into the real culture of that organization, and you find that it's all about beating the supplier up. It's all about, if somebody makes a mistake, take their head off. If they don't get it right, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, get rid of them. And I understand where all of that talk comes from. And at the end of the day, you're running a business, and the business has things that it needs to deliver. But don't say one thing and do another. If you're going to talk about trust as a real value in an organization, then make sure that the actions that certainly the leadership team is taking emulate that and really support that value. And then I would encourage companies to talk about, well, if trust is an important value, what does that mean? What does that mean in this business on a day-to-day basis? And what happens if somebody displays the behavior that is completely in the opposite direction of trust? What do? Do you call it out, or do you just allow it to go on?
Yeah,
Because if
that's
you
a
allow
really
it to
good
go on,
point. Yeah.
it's like a kid, right? It's like having a child. If you just ignore the behavior, it's like acceptance.
It is acceptance. And yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, all of the industries that I've worked in, and they're mostly online tech, internet-based companies, there are some forward thinking. And again, I'm not going to name any companies either, but it's the same thing. I completely agree that it was talked about. But then when it actually come to trusting each other, and when people broke that trust, and some senior people as well, when it was challenged, it wasn't really dealt with. And then that really denigrates the whole company culture. It goes against the vision. And then that's when it starts to get really difficult, right? As a leader in these companies, and you have to make some tough choices. And I think for me, I had to walk away from a few companies because I just couldn't change it, for one. Because, in once an organization gets past 10,000 employees, it's difficult anyway, right? But then you've just got to make that choice. And I think even that's good leadership, that some people don't want to walk away from a particular role because they feel like they've given up, or they're going to be judged, or they've failed. But actually, good leadership is about knowing when to turn a corner, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you talk about being judged, and that's something that I've been judged. We're all judged to a certain extent. Because my leadership style is more collaborative, and I operate with empathy and compassion, then I am often judged as being weak, not tough enough,
Oh, yeah.
particularly in the automotive. And over the years, I've learned to say, okay, you have your leadership style, I have mine, right? I am not changing it. And knowing that judgment was taking place, and knowing that those, side conversations after I left the room or in private offices, knowing that they were happening, but still having that commitment to stay with this leadership style, it became empowering towards the latter years of my career, but difficult journey along the way. And it takes a lot to just say, no, this is right. I know it's right. I know it right to every fiber of my being, and I'm not going to change that leadership style because I know it works.
Yeah, and it's really amazing that you're saying it, and it's really empowering for women to hear that. What I've noticed, and I could never do things that were not congruent with who I am, and that is shouting at people and demanding things, and and I know that I was seen as weak in that moment, but I was actually the one that was delivering results. And I would, I started saying, as women, I had quite a few conversations with men, young men that were that wanted to contribute and grow their leadership positions. They were bullied and submitted to behave in a certain way because they were feared that, being themselves will not get them where they want to be.
You're exactly right. It's that leadership level at the top that bears so much responsibility for the culture. So young leaders coming up, if they see these people behaving that way, that sends a signal to the brain, right? That's what success looks like. If you operate this way, then you will be successful. And then it just perpetuates. It just continues and continues and continues. And that's why I think we're at a critical point right now in the way that we work. We know technology is here. It's coming at us fast and furious. If we don't change that leadership model now, those companies that have, what I would call the old-fashioned leadership model, if we don't change that now, they're not going to survive in the future, because the millennials and Gen Zs coming up behind will not tolerate that leadership model.
No,
absolutely will not.
And the cool thing is that it's not being tolerated, and I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the culture changing. I'm not saying it's perfect. And I think, that's why we're both in the business of,
Yes.
developing and helping and supporting next level leaders, but it is happening. But again, that doesn't mean we can be complacent, right? And just sit on our hands. And I think for anyone listening, I mean, thank you, Jan, for speaking to us, because your story, it definitely resonates with us. And just to hear that there is a way forward, and to be really successful and get to, a VP level and be able to navigate that really difficult industry. And let's be honest, in the industry you were in, very male dominated and very stiff, and, all of the challenges that come with that. But you, as a leader, decided very early on that, no, that's not going to work for me. I need to forge my own way. And for whatever reason, that made sense to go forward. So I think it's really cool to hear for people that it is possible.
And it works.
Yeah, and it does work. It's not that we're just giving it airtime. And that's the thing. I mean, a lot of the corporate culture, like we said, there's a lot of talk around do this, do that, this is the right thing. But to hear people like yourself that have actually tried and tested this, and you were really honest to say that it's never been that easy as well. It is going to be a roller coaster, right? It's not that you won't get challenged and you won't have to step up and, make some tough choices. But again, if you lead that way, then you're going to have a lot of people who are going to respect you, and they're going to have your back, and also probably going to impact them to change their lives as well. Because I'm guessing in the industry that you were in, it must have resonated with other people that you were close to in your leadership team. Even if they might not have given you the feedback, I'm pretty sure that years later, people have probably reflected and said, wow, I was really grateful that I worked with Jan. I mean, did you find that at all in terms of feedback when you left the industry, or did you become a mentor afterwards? Or
I think I've been a mentor for years. People call me, people I've worked with decades ago. I still keep my network alive. And some people have said, yes, I have helped them to break through some barriers and to progress their careers. And I see them now being successful, and I love it. I just absolutely love to see. I love it when people break through a particular barrier, in their mind. And there's one example I give you. It's a personal one, but it's a quick one. I was never a runner, ever. I was never the kid that was picked for the team. I was always the last one, right? I was the one standing with the head down, because nobody ever wanted me on the team, because that sport's not my thing. I'm not a competitive athlete, not by a long shot. So, okay, so I have that going on. So I was never a runner. I would never do sports. I was diagnosed with a lung condition when I was 40, which it's all cleared up now, but I couldn't even get on a treadmill, so I could barely walk. So here you go, something else that validates that you can't run, right? So years go by, and just a few years ago, I was working with a colleague, and she's an Ironman competitor. And I was going to a gym called Orange Theory. It's sort of a thing in America right now. It's taking the world by storm. And I was going into this exercise class, and she said to me, oh, you go on, you run on the treadmill for at least 10 minutes during these sessions. I said, yes. And she says, well, you're a runner. And I said, but that's ridiculous. I am not a runner. It's really hard. I can barely do this treadmill work. And she says, no, you're a runner. And then I went through all the excuses in my mind, right? The narrative that's been running my entire life that tells me you're not a runner. And then one day she came into the office and she said, here. I said, what's that? And she said, I've signed you up for a race. I said, oh my God, there's no way.
Amazing.
You're insane. I've never run a race in my life. And I was, at this point, I was 51. There's no way I'm running a race. She said, you're running a race. I'm coming with you. I've signed you up. There's no choice. So I thought, okay. So I was in. So we ran the race. We did a 5K and I got the medal at the end. And she looked at me and she said, now you're a runner and you cannot tell me that you're not a runner because you ran a race. And it blew away that constraint in my mind. And I just think, you know, why, if we could do that with all the barriers that hold us back from reaching our full potential, how wonderful life would be and what great leaders we would have, right?
Yeah, and I guess we are here to help that happen. I really love this story. I really, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. But for the people listening to this, what's next for you, Jan, in terms of where your business is at? And if people want to get in contact with you and obviously become better leaders or impact the teams that they manage, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, thank you. So the company is Gravitas Detroit, and the website is www.gravitasdetroit.com. And we are out there forging a path to help teams improve their performance and help leaders not only of the teams, but leaders of individuals of their own lives really unleash that potential that they have inside of them.
Great. It's
Beautiful.
been a real pleasure to talk to you. So thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.